Hello and welcome to Vision Makers. I'm here with Christina Bilovich. Our partner Nikki Virado is behind the scenes with us today. And we're here to talk to my good friend Anthony Burr. Anthony is a PR expert based in London, the founder of Bauer Media. I have had the benefit of his services in the past. He works with top politicians in the UK, with athletes, mostly soccer and leading boxers, and also with leading brands like Sony. And we're very happy to have Anthony here and get the benefit of his wisdom. So Anthony, here we are three months into the sort of meat of the crisis for the UK and for Russia. You know, how are things looking from your vantage point in London?
Yeah, good morning, Christine, and good morning, Dan. Yeah, pleasure to be on this series. It's fantastic and nice to connect again. Yeah, so the scene here in London, I think is generally people are trying to be positive. It's a difficult time, as we know, across the world. And I think what we're finding right now is that people feel that maybe they're over the worst of it, and that there is that light at the end of the tunnel. The difficulty, and this is where people are being very cautious to tell the people that feel that we're at the end, is that it may not be, in terms of personally or business-wise, that this is a virus that is going to probably stay with us for a very, very long time in different guises or different strains. And businesses have actually got to really focus on how they're going to do this as a long-term strategy. The difficulty in the beginning was people, I think, generally, and businesses thought it was, right, we're down in lockdown. And a lot of the consensus was that Britain went a little bit too late. We should have gone maybe a week or two earlier. We saw it happen in China, then we saw it encroach into Europe and hit Italy very, very badly. And I was due to be in Italy at that time. And that was a time when I think a lot of people now retrospectively feel that Britain should have gone into lockdown probably in the first week of March rather than in mid-March. And that, scientists have said, has made a big difference. Now the difficulty, or that is that people might be too optimistic and feel that we are out of the worst. And actually, as Dan and I previously talked about, there is a second wave probably coming, maybe a third and a fourth. And I think every business has to look at this as a huge, long, ultra marathon and how they're going to get through this. Certainly, I've been speaking to my clients about this. It's not a case of, hey, suddenly lockdown finishes and we get back to normal. That's not the case personally or in business.
Great. You have, over your career as a journalist, been and a PR expert, probably faced many crises. You know, are there any crises that particularly stick out? Is there any lessons that you bring to your clients now that you're, you know, been around the block a few times?
Yeah, it's an overused word right now, unprecedented, as we've heard many times before with coronavirus and COVID-19. There have been so many different crises that have come across. I mean, we can just talk about recent ones which affected the travel sector when you had the ash cloud over Iceland. And that affected so many people in terms of business and travel. But that was for a short period of time. That was also affecting the travel industry in Maine and people that flew across Europe and mainland Europe and across the United States. This has affected the entire world. And I don't think anyone has seen that happen. Maybe not in their lifetime, certainly since the end of World War II, that actually one aspect, one thing can just turn the world upside down in such a short amount of time. And who could have prepared for it? I think everybody was looking at China and maybe it was just a Chinese problem. We've seen that with SARS in the past, but this has suddenly encroached upon everybody, no matter where you're from, no matter what country you're from, and it's affected the entire population, and no one can prepare for that. But all you can do is you can look at the situation in front of you. And my advice always is micromanage, always micromanage crisis. You need to take every single day or even hour at a time and then think what you're going to do next. Because if you don't, you know, as we always say, you probably have the same phrase, I think, in Russia, is, you know, God laughs at the best plans. And this is the thing, you can make plans all the time, but things change and they change so quickly. And obviously I've worked in politics for a long time as well. And we always have that old phrase that you know, a week is a long time in politics. Well, actually, at the moment, with how things are going, an hour is a long time, and we're seeing that. So, in terms of crisis levels, this is DEFCON 5 as the old war games was. This is the highest you will find, certainly, at the moment, and everyone has to work towards it, because the ramifications, it's not just health, and health is always number one, but it's also what's happening to the economy. In Britain, as I said, although we're trying to be cautiously optimistic here, we know that our economy is going to be shrinking, and we're going to be hitting a recession and possibly a depression. So my clients are very aware of that, and how we're going to counter that, and how we're going to actually thrive after that. Yeah, so in terms of crisis levels, Dan and Christina, this is unprecedented. Whether we'll see anything like this again, we hope not in our lifetimes, but certainly I think since World War II, nothing comes close.
And it's interesting to me, because you mentioned your political experience as well. As somebody who deals in communications, it seems to me this is a time that puts enormous responsibility on politicians to communicate. I mean, they always have to communicate; it's important for their lifeblood. But now it's a matter of life and death. When you look out across the world, do you see any leaders and you say, "Wow, those people are really being effective in their communication"? Because I think for politicians especially, they need to be shown as being in control and being actively managing the situation. But there's also an element of trying to communicate compassion for your people, trying to keep them feeling brave and engaged at a time when many of them may be feeling exactly the opposite. Do you see anybody out there then you think, wow, that person is doing a great job?
I mean, you make a really good point. This is the time that makes or breaks governments and politicians. And to be honest, politicians thrive on situations like this, the really good ones, that they want, in a sense, a huge moment which will define their careers or their leaderships. We've seen it before. We always talk about the old adage, a war always will help the future election, because it galvanizes people and brings people together. I think in the beginning, the media was reporting that they were very, very confident and pleased with our current government, which is a conservative government led, as you know, by Boris Johnson, and one that has recently won an election, which he called. So he has a long term in office, and he really looked at this as maybe being his Churchillian moment, obviously a politician that he admires. And he felt that this is some way he could bring the country together, and we could be resolute and stand together and fight this and come out the other side. The difficulty with Boris, unfortunately, I think there was a tipping point, and it came when he actually was hospitalized. And by all accounts, it was very close to not making it. A lot of people that he was nearly put on a ventilator, that was a moment for me as a tipping point where suddenly we felt, gosh, no matter what your political views, you can't lose your leader. Imagine how demoralizing that would be. But then he came out the other side, and although I thought there was going to be a great deal of sympathy for him, suddenly more fingers were being pointed. So we've seen a real turn of someone who they thought everyone was well behind, and now every day that goes past, fingers are starting to be pointed, and the criticisms are growing and growing. And it's difficult to manage this, because no politician would have foreseen this. In terms of this time last year, we were talking about Brexit here in the UK. Yeah. Nobody's talking about that now. I know, Dan, you and I have talked a lot about Brexit, but what's Brexit? And that was something that dominated our political landscape for many years, as you can imagine. So we have a new government here. Confidence was high in them. It has waned, and it wanes every day. And I do warn a couple of those now that they do have to come and tackle this on the front foot and really focus on getting the country back. So my answer, maybe even sort of recent 6-7 weeks ago, would have been UK doing quite a good job. But now the finger is getting pointed, and we don't have a very good, if you're looking at statistics, it's not very good compared to some other European countries. Yeah. So in terms of world leaders, I think you have to also look at Germany, for me, that they have actually done probably the best job, because they've got back into some semblance of society being how it was before in a very, very quick way. And I always say, UK should compare itself to Germany, because we have similar structures, we have very similar populations, and I think that when we're looking at a gauge to see how well we're doing compared to other European countries, always use Germany. Now, Germany have got back to playing a lot of sports, so that has galvanized the country. Their infection rate is very low. So to answer your question, if there's any leader I think that people can look at and say, okay, this is going well, and they're actually managing well, country are respecting what they're doing, then I think Germany's up there. The Scandinavian countries, as you know, they've had a very mixed response. Sweden is the biggest controversy because obviously they have gone and they looked at science and they thought, early on, we knew we were not going to get over this quickly. And we knew that socially it's difficult for people to be in lockdown. So they just thought, right, we will let people be clever, be cautious, and see how that goes. We don't know the results yet, but all the people I speak to in Sweden, I've got some clients there and a family there, they're very happy with how it is going. But they have a different mentality in Sweden to the rest of the world. They're very respectful of their laws, and I think that cannot work in certain countries, maybe not, maybe the UK. So in Europe, I think the jury is still out in many countries. In Sweden, you know, we'll see at the end who did best. But at the moment, I think Germany is doing very well. And then if you're looking globally, then New Zealand is having a fantastic result. Obviously, it's easier to manage when you are a country of that size. But in terms of their policy, how they've managed everything, the numbers are incredible in terms of how they managed it. And there is so much public support for their premier, Jacinda, who is really leading the way. And I think all world leaders could take actually a leaf out of her book. She's someone that I think has universal support and universal appeal.
Do you think, in your many years doing with communications and politics, do you think that the media cycle and with social media that things are meaner, that it's harder to, you know, have that moment where the society or the world really respects you? You know, it seems, from my perspective, it seems like people start shooting the second anything happens. Doesn't matter, you know, what side you're on, and certainly in the United States. Does it seem meaner to you for politicians and athletes and brands?
Dan, you're so right. I remember when the advent of Twitter, and I remember clearly the day that myself and the former editor of the Daily Express newspaper and a couple of the leading other PRs, we all sat there and we talked about what is this Twitter. We all felt it was a big moment in public relations and in media. So we had this sort of big meeting about it. I remember it lasted about 3 or 4 hours. I mean, the people in that meeting now are sort of one of them is the leading marketing officer of Universal globally and so forth. So these are people that we knew what they were talking about. And obviously this is back in 2007, 2008. So, you know, and that was the time when I had actually just recently left journalism to go into PR. So I was still understanding the machinations of PR from being on the other side. But it was a defining moment because suddenly, to put it in a very simple terms, is that PRs were always there to protect brands, protect politicians, protect all these high profile people, and they didn't have access to the public so much, and that was our role as a PR. You know, we were in between the two, so they weren't directly with their consumer or their audience, and that was great because everything could be managed and staged, and we could be very careful in terms of our communication channels. Suddenly, this new communication channel had opened up where people could just talk to each other within seconds, and it was a defining moment. And unfortunately, what we have seen is because of that, people, and because you have just a short amount of time or words to write in Twitter, people can write things out of context, or it's easy to be mean. We've seen that. It's very easy to write something or be mean. It's hard to be kind. So without a doubt, Twitter changed everything in terms of how everything is portrayed. And the media has suffered from it. In terms of mainstream media, I'm talking about the national newspapers, international newspapers, circulation has gone down because people are relying on social channels now. They're looking at that for promotional channels and they're looking at it for influence as well. So as a politician, my goodness, it was easy to be in pre-2007 because you had people like me protecting you, and you didn't have you know, sort of people knocking on your door virtually and criticizing you. I mean, I cut my teeth in local newspapers, and that was always the old thing, is that's how to really learn how to make sure your copy that you write or your stories are accurate. Because what happens is when you work in a local newspaper in a local town, if you make a mistake on the obituary columns and say that, you know, that Jan Francis was sort of 83 years old and actually she was 82, then their sons and grandsons will come and knock on the newspaper door and say, you got that wrong. And so you're under that pressure, and you knew that as well. And I think that was something that you're protected from in a national scale, and that all changed with Twitter. So, you know, there's been a lot of campaigns. I did a great campaign for Hello Magazine, which is a fantastic consumer magazine here in the UK. And we did a big hashtag, Be Kind, kindness, because there was a lot of meanness, not just about politicians, but about the royal family, particularly our princesses at the time, Meghan and Kate, and we tried to do that, but they're great things, these kind ones, but they don't really resonate because you've got the keyboard warriors and the people who want to be mean, and Twitter can get very toxic. And I think there's a lot of my clients who just dip in and out of Twitter because they can't take how toxic it can be. So yeah, in terms of public relations, the media landscape, I always think we'll always look at Twitter as being a defining moment.
Anthony, how in your opinion, strategies of mass media in UK is different to the influences of mass media in Russia, for example?
Yeah, so I think the difficulty sometimes with Russia is that, and I always say this to a lot of clients, because I have a lot of Russian clients and UK clients, and we have actually one campaign at the moment in Russia that we're boiling up and heating up. And I was talking to a client the other day, and they said, right, so what should we do? How are we going to time this? Are we going to shouldn't we build up a lot of Russian press first, and then that will take it to the UK, and when we go to the US, and that will give credibility. And I said, well, actually, it's the other way around in a sense, because although Russia now, as we all know, is opening up and there's some fantastic, great press platforms out there, what I found in the past is if I've had a very good Russian campaign, and I take that even to sort of global international platforms, there's still the credibility issue. There's still, okay, well, did you pay for that article to go in, or was deals made? There's not a credibility on that side of things. And it's similar to a lot of Chinese clients I have as well, and they don't look at it as a democratic media like the Western media does. So when I go to the US or I go to the UK and say, hey, this brand is good, or this is a high profile character, I want you to feature them, and here's the press they've had in their backyard, it doesn't have any of the sort of gravitas. So I always flip it and do it the other way around, because hopefully that can work as well. But they are different markets, entirely different markets, and you do need, and this is why with this book campaign that I'm talking about we're doing now, my colleague Yana is handling the Russian side, because obviously she has a great understanding of that, and obviously the language, and she's doing the Russian campaign simultaneously to me doing the US and the UK campaign. And although it's a Russian story, we need the whole globe to look at it. Entirely different campaigns, Christina, entirely different ways of working. And that's the thing, when you go to different territories, you have to be very, very mindful. And I've worked a lot in China over the last few years now. And China is completely different again. So it's a real learning. If you're a PR, and that's where I'm very broad in certainly my sectors and what I do, but you have to understand those territories and live in them and stay in them to understand how those media works. I mean, the greatest way, the old way of doing things was, when I was a newspaper journalist in the PR, is that you meet people and you go and meet them in a bar and a cafe, and you bounce off each other. And this is how you make the contacts, the old-fashioned way of doing things. And even pre-COVID, you find that the millennials, or even starting to be the Gen Z journalists, they don't like face-to-face. They're because they have so much media to do at the same time. They're so involved with it. They didn't sometimes even like a phone call, because you're wasting their time. You have to either sort of tweet them, text them, or send stuff over. They don't like the verbals. And the old school ways, they used to make deals with journalists and PRs in pubs and bars, and and do the horse trading there. Now it's all very digital, and the landscape's changed completely. So and that's what you find is that sometimes you call up a journalist, and they won't take your call, but you email them, they'll email you all day. So in terms of you have to tailor each in terms of a generational thing, and obviously a territory thing as well. But what I'm finding with Russia, to be honest, is that in terms of some of the coverage that I've been getting and the response, is that they're a lot faster now, which is great to see, because speed is sometimes of the essence in terms of stories and getting publicity out there. So I've seen a lot of speed increase over the last couple of years in terms of when you want to get responses and get things out.
I'm curious. Go on. I'm curious, given your exposure to sports figures. One of the things that we've talked a lot about on Vision Makers is, how the currency of influence is changing, how what might have been something that gave somebody very, big prominence in society or in business or in culture 25 years ago, things have changed really sort of rapidly. How does it look, and I know you've worked with some of the biggest global athletes, including Wayne Rooney. And I'm just wondering, sort of, how does this landscape work? I mean, I imagine what it means is it means that they have to interact with somebody of your expertise much more frequently than they might have had to do, you know, a couple of decades ago, when the most important thing was what they were doing on the field or on the court.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, money has got a lot to say about that too, because as you say, 20, 25 years ago, you know, footballers were probably only making, the top footballers were making maybe about 3 or 4% what they make now. And you wouldn't have, because especially the team sports, we know it in the US too, you know, you wouldn't have a lot of individual sportsmen in those teams that needed a PR like myself, because all they do, as you say, is their job is to go out to train every day, and then to go out once or twice a week and play in the big games, and concentrate on that. And to be honest, sportsmen, that's all they want to do. You know, fame and media and exposure and profile raising, they don't care about that. You know, they're just looking at one thing. They just want to win. They're competitive people and they want to do well. It's all changed now. Everything's changed. They cannot, in a sense, because of the money they make, they have a responsibility to do more for society, for their fans, and for the endorsements, because, you know, their sponsors want them to do so much more. So if we're looking at footballers, you know, 30 years ago, as I said, you'd only have maybe a handful or people that you'd know about, be household names, because of everything else they did. And normally, unfortunately, it would be maybe for negative reasons. You know, you've seen that George Best is one of the footballers you know, that everyone saw of all time, and because he was great looking, but also what people looked at was his nightlife and his love for girls that sort of unfortunately eclipsed all his footballing skills. And he was someone that would have needed a PR totally 100%, because that would have been able to help him craft his image better. But in those days we didn't exist. So, and nowadays most people, I mean, I remember when I started working with Wayne, you know, back in 2007. Earlier. And the thing is there was that he was a young player, a great player, but he was just, for England, he was the great white hope. He was someone that's going to win us World Cups, and he was the greatest talent we'd seen since Paul Gascoigne. But also, you know, he was a young kid that needed guidance. And Ian Monk, you know, my old editor at the Express, who sort of guided me in my early days, and sort of got hold of him and being so this is what we're going to craft, and try and make sure that we look after all the side issues, so he can just go out every Wednesday and Saturday and kill it and win the games and so, because that's all he wanted to do. That's all footballers wanted to do, is to play games. So, but nowadays, especially with the racism, Black Lives Matter, all these other things, you have a lot of footballers that now need to take a stand. And part of the whole makeup now is how they can handle the media, and can they make sure that they do the best for their sponsors. And it's a much bigger responsibility that they have. And they have to also learn with the media. I mean, I remember, let's talk about Wayne again. I remember in the beginning, there's some of the feedback we had from journalists in the mix zone. So the mix zone is when you finish your match, you get changed, and then you go off to the bus, or you go to have a drink afterwards. But there's a mix zone where you're allowed to speak to journalists. And that's where the journalists get their copy, their after match reports. And some you know, players that I worked with before were calling me up saying, why didn't he talk to me? You know, he scored a hat trick and he didn't talk to me, and I'm going to write a really bad report about it now if I can, and that's it. But so we had to encourage players to spend more time with journalists, although they didn't want to. The last thing they wanted to do after a game is maybe talk to the journalists, especially if they lose. Right? But if you did, but if you did that and they started to, it was amazing to watch. Suddenly, you know, in terms of their coverage from the top sports journalists in the country, it just flipped, because they were giving the journalists the time, just a couple of minutes after a game, to give some pithy quotes on how they felt, or most quotes. And suddenly, you know, you saw the match reports come afterwards, or the treatment by the newspapers, and it would be, oh, you know, we've got a photo of so and so last night, you know, before a game, but you know, thank you, because of the stuff you did with us before, we won't include it, and you know, you do those deals. Whereas if a footballer or any sportsman isn't going to help the press, they're not going to help them either. So that relationship needs to be really crafted very, very well. So as I said, as soon as you start persuading players, start talking to the press in a controlled environment, giving them what they want, just a little bit, they get a lot back in return too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm also curious, you know, in the Premier League in England, and if you look at what's happening in sports in the US, you have increasing numbers of international players, and I'm wondering how, you know, do you think, I mean, in a way they're sort of representing not only themselves on the court, but they're representing their home country. You know, you have so many great athletes coming from all over the world, and they may be the only Serb or Greek or Croat or African or Brazilian that somebody knows. And so I wonder, how do they interact with the media? I mean, it's a different language, it's a different culture, they're outsiders.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we encourage a lot when they do come from the different countries. Look, it's great for the clubs. We've seen it, that there have been astute signings by clubs before that have signed Chinese or Japanese players, because they know that actually commercially it's a fantastic thing, because suddenly their team will be supported by millions in those territories, and in terms of merchandise will go through the roof, and that's always been a very good play. But then for the players themselves to be happy, I've worked with so many players with so many different agendas and how the outcome is. Some players, depends on their character, some players just want to play football, and they don't maybe even make an effort with the language. And when they don't do that, and they don't sort of integrate with the culture, part of the club and the society around, they just train, go home, play the matches, go home. And it's quite a lonely life for a few of them, especially the young guys who maybe aren't married or have got families. And that's very difficult for them. So for me, it's always learn the language, understand about the club you're playing in. If you start to do that, and we've seen the most successful players, foreign players that have gone to other territories, are the ones that learned the language straight away, really made an effort, and actually interacted with the local players, local-based players as well, because culture is hugely important. And the other players that think they're just going there for the money or the football reasons, they never work out. They never become part of the fabric of the club, or the supporters. And the supporters, you can't really lie to supporters about how what you're doing, because they can see, they watch every move, they see everything that you do. So if you're just there to pick up a big wage, or just maybe play football and not really care about anything else, your responsibilities, then those are not the successes. So the always advice we give is, if you're moving to another country, learn the language, interact with some of the icons of those clubs who are born near the near the ground, who've been there since the youth academy days, and also try and sort of integrate in society. Go to local restaurants, meet the fans, meet the local press as well. And in that way, you have the whole PR exercise where you become, and when you become loved by the fans, in terms of your playing ability, we see it before, it's up 20%, because every time you touch the ball, they give it a cheer. Whereas sometimes we see, unfortunately, the players they don't like, every time they touch the ball, they'll get on their backs, and that affects players. So, there's a huge difference in personalities, and clubs are being very good now. Clubs are looking at all these aspects of personalities before they're signing them, rather than their footballing ability, to see if they can fit into the culture and how it's going to work. It is very scientific. So, whenever I've worked with players who've come over from different countries, that's something I've always really sort of implored for them to do. Sometimes they just don't want to do it. It's not within their, it's not within their mentality. Everyone's different. But if you can hit those sort of key points, then the rest will be quite easy, because then you can just do the talking on the pitch, and your performance always goes up.
Anthony, Dan said to me that you have 3 children. What do you think? What will happen to the education, and what is it's supposed to be? My children studying in Manchester, and they are really worried about that education shifting into the online. What will happen? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very good question. One of my good friends is an Ofsted inspector, and they're the big examining boards, and they look at all the criteria for safety in schools. The thing is, from the top at the moment, it is a big unknown. They are kind of winging it. Every day there's a different message coming out from the authorities. Every day, there's different ideas, and every school is doing something differently too. I mean, as you say, I have 3 children. 2 are not allowed at school, but 1 is. So one is going, and they're all 3 different schools. One is going to sort of primary school, and they've decided that her year can go back because it's their last year, and they wanted them to have closure. And they've put bubbles in together, so it's a smaller classrooms and there's more space. And then the older one, who's highly academic and has been doing so well at school all the time, she is really struggling, because she thrives on seeing the teachers, getting the feedback, having the contact, and just seeing her friends and competing with her friends on the grades. And she's, although she's been doing really well, I've seen such a big dip in her, in terms of her motivation, because every day you're sitting in front of the computer and you're not getting that kind of interaction that you need to. Another kid is having, these kind of Zoom classes all the time, which is working well for them. So the thing is, I think your question, what do you see? I think it has to be uniform across countries, that they all do the same thing, because at the moment it's like, why can they get to school and I can't? Why are they getting great, feedback and Zoom class meetings, and all I'm getting is a long, long message of all the stuff I need to do today on on Google Classroom. So, but I think there needs to be uniformity, but the difficulty here is, I think Dan can probably speak better, is that what I'm finding in some of my American friends and their kids is that there's a bit more uniformity, and they're having the same kind of class experiences. Here in the UK, there's a big failure going on, where the messages that teachers are getting from the government are just changing every day, and they're not being very assertive. So it's a huge, it's a huge issue here. And also the people that took their big grades, we have GCSEs, which is when you're 16, and we have grades for A levels, is when those are the grades you get into universities with. Now these people, they haven't been able to sit their exams. They're never going to get this time back. They're going to have predicted grades. So that's going to be very tough. I mean, I would have been a straight failure then. For me, I wasn't great on coursework. I just managed to turn up on the day and do really well. I studied right at the end and managed to, I was very good in exams. So for me, I would have probably got terrible grades predicted, when in the end I got excellent grades because I was good at exams. So these poor kids, their whole future is up in the air. And there's nothing you can say to sugarcoat it, unfortunately, because I've tried with my kids, and I've tried with my friends' kids, because they're never going to get that time back. After you finish your exams, it's great, isn't it? You get your results, and then you move on to the next stage. And there's no sugarcoating it and making it better for them. It's a really, really nervy time for them. And as I say, in terms of like politics and media managing, I'm trying to teach my kids as a client now. Every day I'm trying to talk to them and saying, right, so this is the development, this may happen, just to try and encourage them, because it's tough. It's tough being a kid anyway.
Interesting. One of the things that Christina and I talk a lot about is how the world is shifting for people professionally, and there's a lot more importance now in defining yourself, defining what you bring to the world, trying to communicate that out to people. Whether you're doing a startup or you're running a corporation or you're freelancing or you're just an expert in your field, you're board member. I'm wondering, for you, how that looks, right? Because these are skills that certainly when I was going to school and university, nobody ever told me about, managing my social accounts or how to maintain powerful connections with people so that if I wanted to use them in my business life in the future, I could, and all of this stuff. And I wonder, for you, how that works. How do you help people who are coming to this sort of not having expected to? And then also, going to Christine's question, for your own children, how do you try to tell them about the fact, because we all want our kids to do well in school and go to a great university and all that, but we also need to try to teach them about how the world is changing. And they're much more, for my own daughters, I find that they're much more, sort of naturally and calmly aware of social media and how it works and what they different mean, in a way that's much deeper than I do. But I also, try to figure out how can I help them understand what they should be, how they should integrate that with their other, the other elements of their lives.
Yeah, no, very, very good question. So the first one I'll answer about people being more aware of how they can manage themselves. So I'll give you a really good case study, which is live at the moment. So one of my clients is a double Olympian gold medalist called Tom Ransley, who is a British rower, and he won gold over in Rio in 2016, and he was due to go into Tokyo in 2020, but Tokyo, as we all know, has been put off the Olympics until 2021 because of coronavirus. And we talked at length, and he said, I can't do another year. He said, this is tough. Rowing is unforgiving. And to think that he was thinking, do I train for another year and then have all this pain? And he just didn't have the motivation. So we announced his retirement a couple of months ago, and it got huge coverage. I mean, normally rowers don't get a lot of coverage because obviously it's a team sport and there's quite a few of them. But it was multiple, every national newspaper front page that he was retiring. And before, a lot of people probably wouldn't even know Tom because all he's done is row his whole life. But because there was no sport, I said it was a good time to retire. You'll get a lot of profile. Now, the reason we did a big PR campaign is because Tom now needs to move into the second phase of his life. And someone who's only been a professional sportsman, he never did social media. All he did was just sport completely, and he didn't want to do any more. But now the guy's got to earn a living. What's he going to do? And I said, you've got to embrace being in public life, and your retirement will put you on the front pages for a short time. So he's looking now at getting into journalism, being a broadcaster, and there's finite jobs in that side, and learning his craft. He writes really, really well, which is good, but he needs to do stuff in front of the camera. So it's a case of raising his profile. As you said then, how do I prepare him for that? Well, he started an Instagram account, and it's not natural to him, because he's a very private person, but he understands that there's a goal to that. We've done other interviews, a lot of interviews since, and sometimes approaching him his private life. Again, he's not comfortable with it, but he does understand that to be able to build up a profile, so he's appealing to get jobs in the media and as after dinner speaking, they look at social media followers, they look at your profile because they need to get something out of it too. So that's a real sort of use case that we're building at the moment with Tom, someone who needs to embrace social media and embrace something in terms of profile rating, which is maybe outside their comfort zone. And then moving on, obviously, to the kids. I mean, this is a subject that, as we all know, we've all got children, and they're our #1 client always, and we're passionate about. But this is, I mean, they're all Gen Z. I mean, my kids are Gen Z. I think yours are. Well, yeah, yours are as well, Dan. I'm not sure how old your kids are, Christina. But you understand what I mean by Gen Z, the people who were born 1996 onto 2010. And these guys are fearless. We've seen it. They are just absolutely fearless. They're my favorite generation right now because, we've seen it with different protests and stuff. They don't really, that sort of consequence part of their brain isn't there. As Dan, you just said now, they're very, very cool with stuff. They're going to go and do stuff. They're going to protest. They're going to talk about stuff. And the ramifications, they don't care about. It's like, we're going to do this. It feels like they've seen how the world has evolved through, and they're not happy with it. And they believe that they have to be the agents of change. And they're a very, very powerful group of people. So, how do I discuss it with my children? And my wife, who is Russian as well, and she came from a very traditional background and so forth. And she, at first, really didn't like, and I'm quite to be honest, she didn't like my parenting methods because she said, to the father, you should tell them how it is. They shouldn't argue with you. And I said, well, no. I said, I've got clever kids. I want them to challenge me because I'm not always right. You know what it's like. I mean, I always thought my dad was right about everything. And isn't that a horrible moment when you realize, oh God, he's not right. he thought he wasn't right. And I didn't want the same thing to happen. I wanted my kids to ask me questions and me to give them answer and see how they felt about it. I mean, and now, my eldest and I, and also my middle daughter, we have huge discussions, which I love because it surprises me every day how worldly they are. And that's because I did introduce them to social media at an early age. People said maybe too early, about 10, because I wanted them to see stuff as long as I was controlling it, as long as I had their accounts and I was able to look at everything they were doing. And they understand a lot more and they ask a lot more. And that's really important. So I'm very excited about our kids' generation. I think they are going to be the agents of change. And the use of social media is generally positive as well. And so that's something where, in terms of my liberal parenting, let's see how it works. I don't know if it's going to work or not, and then we'll see how it comes out. But at the moment, their use of social media is good. They want to change the world. And we've seen it certainly in terms of, the big thing before Corona was, of course, about climate change. And that's going to come on the agenda again very soon. And we've seen that, that movement. And so I'm excited about it. And I think that we should really encourage them to do more, because in a way, what our generations have done, has it been that good? I don't know if history would be very kind to us, but at the moment, they're not seeing the benefits of what we've set up for them.
And, I noticed the Gen Z or Z, as you guys call it, and both of my kids are in it too, is there's this, there's a little bit of an anti-establishment bent to them. And I'm kind of curious, especially given that you guys are in the UK, what do you think these people think about the United States and Russia and England, now? I think, to me, there's been a sea change, and China, right? If you think about what everything looked like 30 years ago with those 4 places and where we are now, it would be very hard to imagine so many different elements. What do you think? How do they perceive these great powers?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my kids, have had a great benefit of traveling to all those territories, and they spend obviously a lot of time in Russia. Every summer, my kids spend with their grandparents, and just 2 months every summer with their grandparents. All they're doing is speaking Russian, and they're never inside. They're only inside to eat babushka's food. The rest of the time, they're outside with all the kids because they live on an estate, and there's a huge playground, and they just hang out from dawn till dusk playing with Russian kids. And it's wonderful to see because they can understand that culture too. But they do see the differences. They do see the differences in terms of mentality and culture. I remember one time, I remember my daughter, she was in a queue at the supermarket, and someone sort of barged past her, and she was just absolutely flabbergasted that this guy didn't apologize or say sorry or anything like that. And it really troubled her because obviously in England everyone says sorry to each other 100 times before they say you go first, you go first. And obviously it was just that little thing, and she really troubled her. She talked about it a lot. But with the kid, but she's seen certainly over the few years that she's been going to Russia, the kids have, we talk about social media again, the kids have become a little bit more worldly as well, so that they have big discussions about what they're told in Russia and what actually we're told here in the UK, in terms of the news cycle and everything else as well. And she has huge arguments with her grandfather because her dedushka he's a very patriotic guy, and everything that he reads in Russian news is obviously completely true. So when my daughter comes over and says what the English news have been saying, they have huge arguments about it.
Wow.
But positive ones as well. She says, but this is how we're told, and you have to look at and she's able to look at the rounded picture, which is very, very important too. But I think in terms of the United States, it's still a very impressionable country, because of Hollywood, because of the movie industry. And you see it the whole time. It is a whole romantic notion that people have about America in terms of how glamorous it is and great sort of capitalist country that it is. So, for example, my eldest, she wants to be a lawyer, but she also she has this lingering thing where she maybe wants to go, and she's a great actress as well. So, she can always think if she gets a big role, then she'll give up law, but we'll see. So I think, and she wants to go to the States. She said she wants to live there because she sees that as a great land of opportunity, and she likes that whole environment too. And I think, and in terms of China, I think China is still quite restrictive in a sense, but I think the technology is great. They've seen robots that make ice creams and so forth, and they love all that. But I think that in terms of those 3 great territories, I think especially when you're brought up in the UK, where you have got obviously liberty and freedom as well, they like the American way of doing things because it has that capitalist, and it's still, despite obviously having a few tricky couple of decades, they still see it as a country where you can really make a mark in terms of your life and the opportunities. Whereas I think, as you say, the great other superpowers of Russia and China, although they've grown infinitely over the last few years, and in terms of opened up, I think they see opportunities probably across the pond than over east.
Sure.
Anthony, according to you, what is the digital world? What events will occur in it? What does it mean for you?
So
completely digital world.
Yeah, the digital world takes over everything now. Look at what we're doing now. We could never have this conversation, just even a few years ago. And imagine if coronavirus would have hit, back at sort of 10, 15 years ago, it would have been catastrophic. And we've seen that the digital world has enabled businesses to pivot and to do completely different things where they never thought they were able to do before. I have a lot of clients who have bricks and mortar, meaning they've got offices in London, which are costing them up to £10,000 a month. And they've just had that because they need that office. They thought they need aid to have all the staff in, to make sure they're working, they're being collaborative. But also because, hey, we need to show that we have this office in Mayfair or in the city. And that has to be an impression. But now a lot of them are saying, you know what, we've done really well. We don't need to go back. We're actually going to continue working from home because people that we work with, we trust, they're all C-level and things are going well. I mean, looking at one example, I've got a lot of friends that work for Bloomberg. Bloomberg UK are not probably going back till January at the earliest. And has anyone seen a difference with the content that Bloomberg are putting out? No. I'm getting through to a lot of Bloomberg journalists at the moment that I can now get hold of before because they were on planes or they're traveling and they're going to different things. Now, obviously, they're not. So in terms of the content, that's been working well. So, you know, that people will be looking at that as well. And the event space, I think we touched on it before, the event space, and I've got, again, another client, huge client, and thinking she had, right, oh, this isn't going to work. It's going to be a disaster for us and revenues. But they pivoted so quickly and so well that you have the virtual events now. And we have the London Tech Week in the summer, which is due to be happening around now. They've now gone back and they're doing things in September. And I've had a lot of people, clients, who are supposed to be talking at London Tech Week, doing keynote speeches there. And as soon as they Corona, we thought, well, that's it. That's going to end. And now those the keynote speeches that they will be doing, they're going to be doing virtually at these events. And some of my clients are being paid exactly the same amount of money. They haven't lost revenue because virtual events are working. And that's a great industry where I think clever ones have pivoted very quickly and they said, okay, let's take this virtually and let's get the same out there, because people still want content. People still want to talk things through despite being home. They probably yearn for it even more. So the digital world has been, in a sense, the savior for Corona. And of course, look, humans are gregarious characters. We need to bounce off each other. We all see that. You get the buzz from meetings and face-to-face, and as I say, it's contact sport. But digital has played a huge part in us surviving through the last 3 months, and will survive a lot more as well. So more businesses, more sectors, I think, need to take a leap out of the event sector. I mean, some can't. You look at the travel industry. Is there a solution to that? I can't see one right now. We've got the cleverest people in the world looking at how they're going to save that industry. But that industry, I think we all agree, will never be the same as it was before. You always think things will increase and get better with digital and how we are, but sometimes things have to go back before they go forward. So I mean, you look at Concorde, being a prime example. Concorde, supersonic speed. You thought this is here to stay. Everyone's going to be supersonic, and obviously that doesn't exist anymore. And I think the same will happen in the travel industry. That will probably become like it was back in the 70s and 60s, where it's very sort of premier travel, not this package travel that we see today and before Corona.
Yeah, I could completely agree. I guess I'm sort of curious, since you were a print journalist and did all of the hard work, and you know what it means to spend 10 days beating out a story and then sit down and write it and put it out there. Probably nothing has changed as much as the print media. Maybe less in the UK than in many other parts of the world. But so how do you feel about that? Your old stomping grounds being replaced by 140 characters on Twitter.
Yeah. It's of course, in a sense, it's sad, because I remember as a cub journalist at the Sunday Times, we were up on the 5th floor, and we would, as you say, beat out our copy, and we'd be up there the whole time. But then you go down the lift to the ground floor, and there was a print works all down there, and it was beautiful because you could just see the whole machinations of it going. So there you're writing, and you go down and you see these amazing old print machines and the blue collar workers going in there. And it's really interesting as well in terms of how it worked, because we had these pubs outside our, so as we called, Fortress Wapping, because it was a huge fortress, as we called it, where we had the Sunday Times, the Times, the Sun, and the News of the World newspapers. And we had these two pubs outside. So whenever I'd go into work at sort of 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, the pubs would be absolutely full, especially in the summer, with all the blue collar workers drinking their pints, because for them that was their 6 p.m. That was the end of their working day. So because they work all night on the print, and they're having their beers as we're going in and having our coffees, and then obviously and then it flips the other end of the day. And that was the sort of joy of it. You just saw everything was tangible, everything was right there. You worked in this huge, great sort of British institution, and you worked on the great computers and with huge buzzing newsrooms with the top journalists in the world, crafting out the stories and getting the scoops. And as you say, you had the print works below, and you saw how it all went through. And you did that day in, day out, week in, week out. But I think we all saw the change with digital, and we all saw the change in terms of that had the effect on the advertising revenue in terms of the workload. So when I was a journalist, we had huge newsrooms, 100 deep, And we had great big budgets because we had huge advertorial campaigns, big advertisers on those print newspapers. And so we had big expense accounts to get those stories, to travel the world or to make sure that we got those scoops. And I saw it happen in front of my eyes where, there were just more and more redundancies because of the digital age. Advertising revenue, as we all know, with print media, people always look at, what's the circulation? How many millions are reading that story? That doesn't pay the bills. What pays the bills is the advertisers. So when advertising revenue started to go digital and elsewhere, apart from the national newspapers, which was always the stomping ground, that meant revenues went down. Newspapers' prices had to go up, and newsrooms, in terms of personnel and staff, got smaller. So I just remember sort of sitting there and always having a buzzing newsroom, and then suddenly looking around my shoulder and it's like, oh, this is thinning out a little bit. This is there's a lot less of us than there was before. You sort of think you're going to get the tap on the shoulder, you're next. So regretfully, I mean, I would have worked, if everything would have stayed the old Fleet Street way, I would have stayed in newspapers my entire career, because that's what I always wanted to do since I was a young person. But then because of that, I thought I should make a move, and TV I thought was here to stay. So I did move into television with Sky. So I still stayed as a Rupert Murdoch employee, because I thought TV said stay, and that's going to be that's amazing. And the money's a lot better in TV, as everyone knows as well. But I love writing. I love sort of crafting stories. And for TV, it didn't work so much for me. I didn't like sitting in editing studios for 8-10 hours after, and then having your package put out for 30 seconds and not being able to write or get a scoop and everything else. And so it's difficult, as you say, sometimes you can go and cover a football match down on a wet, cold night on the coast in November, and then you go in and then you package it up for 6-7 hours, and then it goes on TV for maybe 20 seconds. That's not it. So I didn't stay in TV too long, just a couple of years. And that's actually when I moved into PR with, as I said, my old newspaper editor at the Express. He took me on to work in PR, and that was great. I mean, it was. I didn't think, to be honest, with public relations, as a newspaper journalist, you have a disdain for PR people, especially in the old days. It's like, I want to get a story. I've got to go through a PR to do this, and that's always going to be kind of like a hurdle or something that you have to navigate. And you see it's just something that you have to do, but you don't want to do it. So when I was asked to be a PR from probably one of the most macho newspaper guys in the past, that he was at the Daily Mail and Express. In those days, you fight always over stories. So if we didn't get a story, and let's say our rival, the Mail, did, these guys would pin you up against the wall and say, "Why did you not get that story? I thought you were on it." And that was the culture we had in those days. So obviously, when you go into PR, I thought, this is too fluffy for me. It's not my kind of thing. But I think when you do PR, you can do it in a certain way. You can do it strategically. You can do it, or you can run it like kind of like a newspaper, where you're hitting your deadlines, looking after your clients, but you're just getting all those news stories to the journalists. And that's how I like to work. I like to see myself still as a journalist, as someone that's also on their side, to make sure that they're getting a good story, but also making sure that the client gets something from it too. And that's the difficulty. That's always where we weave, is making sure that both parties get what they want. And that's always hard, because they have different agendas. What your client wants in the newspaper and what the journalist wants to put in the newspaper can be poles apart. So that's the key bit where the PR navigates it, is to make sure, okay, we'll get the story in, you've got to give and take. And if you can make that, have that balance right, then you normally win.
Yeah, we're running up against our time, but I want to ask you one last question. One of the interesting and challenging parts of your work, as I understand it, is dealing with people who are facing very difficult situations. And I'm wondering what qualities you see in people who are successful in, pushing themselves up to the podium when they have to talk about a difficult issue, or deciding what they want to communicate. When you look at people who succeed in challenging periods, what are the qualities that you see that help them to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that changes with every individual you have, Dan. And I always say to people, if they've done something wrong and they feel, or there's a crisis, the first person to call is call me. Don't wait it out and hope it will go away. And just they've always got to be honest, first of all, with me and probably the legal team, depending on what they've done. Because if we don't have the full picture, then we can't advise them properly. If we can't advise them properly, then it's all going to go really, really badly wrong. Because then I'll get the journalists calling me up saying, "Oh, well, they said this," or "They were there." And if I don't know that, then how can I defend them? So when they have to front up, for me, it's always be honest. because you've screwed up, and maybe this is it. But you've got to be quite honest now, because now you've got someone, the scrutiny is on you. You've got to be quite honest and be emotional, be emotive, because don't come up with straight set plays about how you did this wrong and you'll never do it again. Be honest and really be specific to whatever has gone wrong, and actually address those questions. I think what we see a lot of times, especially when people go up there, they get asked the questions and they still evade the questions, which is the biggest part. And we've seen it before many times. That's the biggest PR mistake you can ever make, is that if you are being asked questions about something which has been deemed to be wrong and you're evading those questions, they think, well, of course, guilty, or it's even worse than it was before. And sometimes we've seen it where people have gone, they think if they go up, they'll close the story. The most recent example is Prince Andrew with the Epstein crisis.
Yeah.
His PRs were like, let's go off and we'll close the story off. And once he does that, it'll be over. No, that was the worst. I mean, if you have any case where you can just say, case study, why he should not have done that. My advice was, you don't need to do this right now, because you're in trouble here. And actually, sometimes you don't need to go on there and talk about things, because if you do go up and talk about it, you've got to be honest. And if honesty is not going to work, then you have to leave it alone. And the problem was, he went up there and it's car crash TV, as we've all seen.
Yeah.
And so that's always a PR advice. If you're going to front up, then you have to be honest. But if you can't be honest, then you don't. You just do not touch that, because you'll be exposed straight away by the audience or by the interviewer.
I have a last question. Anthony, what's the first thing you will do after everything will be completely open?
Christina, I think the first thing that I will do when completely open, probably could just run around traveling a lot and sing everybody. I think it's I love people. That's why I'm in this business, and I bounce off people. So it's a case of having that contact again. I think in going and seeing, I've got a lot of people to go and see. I've got clients in Russia, I've got clients in China. I'll probably go to both of those countries if they're safe to do so. But yeah, it's to see all the key people that it's difficult to communicate with, via Zoom or Skype and everything else. And I think it's just to get out there and change the scene, because I'm lucky before in terms of how I work. There's 2 days a week I always work from home in any case. So not too much has changed for me. It's just that the 3 days that I do work from in a normal week, I'm in London. That's where I don't maybe do so much as you say the productivity work, but I'm seeing clients, we're going through strategies, we're talking, going to events, having drinks and so forth. But you need that. You need obviously that human contact. As I say, it's a contact sport. And I think that's what everybody has missed, because that's when you get things done. And then when you work from home, that's when you do the paperwork and you get all the nitty gritty done. But your deals are made face to face. And the face-to-face contact is what everybody misses. I touched it before. Humans are naturally gregarious, we're not coders. That's not what I do. I don't sit there and I don't fear the outside world. That's something that I love. I mean, the nice thing, I spoke to Dan about this before, is that in terms of, because I travel a lot, and as that does Dan, and I'm sure you do as well, is that this time it's been great to be with the family and the kids and so forth. And I think my wife has loved it, everyone being together. But I think, we do need to life is all about balance. You need sometimes to stay home, you need sometimes to travel, you need to do things. So for me, it's going to see all the people and bouncing off those as well, because that's where all the great ideas come from. You don't get the ideas with just talking over the phone. You get the ideas of just human nature, talking about each other, and obviously bouncing off each other. So that's what I'll be doing. Because I'm sure you guys will too.
Yeah, and Anthony, I really hope that we'll be able to sit down and have a drink sometime soon, whether in Moscow or London, because I miss that very much too.
Each other.
Anthony, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I know that you and I spoke earlier that you are really feeling challenged by this, and your clients are active, and you have new clients. So it's always a pleasure to see that. But I really appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us. And I do deeply hope that the next few months will allow us to sit down and catch up properly.
Me too, absolutely. No, thank you for having me on, and absolute pleasure meeting you, Christine. I hope to see you too in a short time.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.